Greetings, YouTube! The Doctor is in. Dr. Your Ears Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today we are going to be talking about the last weapon mastery in our series of weapon mastery videos that we've done, and that is the weapon mastery Vex. So I've done these all in alphabetical order. We're going to go over what Vex is. We're going to give it a grade. We're going to talk about what weapons are best used or can be used with Vex, which feats are the ones that probably more or less are the best ones to use with Vex. And then we're going to talk about a few races slash species, not something super important to it. And finally, we're going to talk about classes that go along with Vex. So lots to talk about, lots to go through. Don't go anywhere and stay tuned. All right, before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a question or a comment. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, and don't forget to share this video. And for anyone interested, I have two of my adventures up here, Vault of the Worm for 3rd level characters and The Painted Rock for 4th level characters. These are available at Dungeon Masters Guild, and the links you can find to both of these are below in the description section. All right, let's get into it. Vex. If you hit a creature with this weapon and deal damage to the creature, you have advantage, which means you roll two 20-sided dice, and you take the best one, and that is on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn. It's not against, you just don't get advantage, period. You get advantage against that creature. So if you hit this creature and you kill it, then your advantage is gone. So there are a few riders in this. Also, if you only have one attack, then you're going to have to wait a whole nother round before until your turn comes up again. You're going to have to wait until you can take advantage of this advantage that you just got. And again, if that creature dies or is taken out or has some other kind of condition on them where you don't want to actually attack them within the inter round, then you may or may not want to use that. So that intervening round is not necessarily a great thing, but that is Vex. Now, I think we've gone over a number of other weapon masteries in this, all the way from Cleave, Graze, Nick, down to Vex. And I think Vex goes best with the Nick weapon mastery. And the Nick weapon mastery would be kind of the base. That would be the cornerstone of this build. And we've gone through this build before with a 2-weapon kind of melee martial class. So Nick would be the cornerstone, and then Vex would be something that would be a secondary objective in that, or would be layered inside of that Nick mastery where you're getting a bunch of attacks, where you have one weapon that can utilize Nick, which has to be light and finesse. So if you look up here, it has to have the light property, and it's best if it's a finesse weapon so you can use your dex, but it has to have the light property. And a lot of the Vex weapons also have the light property, so it goes very well with that offhand attack. But Vex is not necessarily a primary objective or a cornerstone for a build. Now, what are we going to give this as a grade? Because there's so many kind of limiting factors or depending factors on Vex, like not having more than one attack and then having to wait a whole round, or not being able to take advantage of that advantage, or not being the cornerstone of a build, I'm giving it a B-. It is a good one. It gives you advantage for rogues. It's great. It allows them to get their sneak attack in, but unfortunately, rogues don't get the extra attack, so you are going to have some trouble with this. Now, rogues do use 2-weapon fighting or offhand fighting pretty easily, but that is about as far as it goes for a rogue, so you're going to have to put some levels of fighter into this, at least 5, maybe ranger, to really take advantage of this. So which weapons have Vex? And we're going to go through these alphabetically and from simple to martial. So the first one that's on this list is a hand axe. Not my favorite weapon for this particular weapon mastery. And when you look at the weapon masteries and the weapons, it's also very important to look at a few things. You want to pay attention to the damage type. Not necessarily the actual damage it does, but the damage type. So for instance, this is 1d6 slashing. So there are certain feats that will not work with the hand axe, like Piercer, because it doesn't do piercing damage. And then you want to pay attention to its weapon properties. This one is light, which gives you some extra advantages if you're using offhand attacks. And it can be thrown as part of an attack. Now, it has a range of 20 and 60, and then it also has Vex. Like I said, hand axe is not my favorite one because it's slashing. It doesn't really go along with the other ones. And it's light, but it's not finesse. So the next one we're going to talk about, and I've got some notes down here that I'm looking at, and the next one we're going to go through is Dart. And this one is actually pretty good. So it's 1d4 piercing. So there is a feat that is going to be in common with a lot of these weapons that we're going to be talking about called Piercer. So that's a good one. It has a range of 20-60. It is finesse and thrown, but it is not light. So, but with a finesse weapon, you can use your strength or dex. So this might be something that a rogue would use to throw. It isn't light, so they're not going to get an offhand attack, but it does have Vex. So if you could throw more than one of these, then you could actually take advantage of Vex. Now, if you hit with one and you only have one attack, you're going to have to wait an entire round before you can do it again. All right, the second one we've got is the short bow. Again, it is a 1d6 piercing, so we're going to be able to use Piercer on this. It is ammunition, which means it's dependent on arrows. It's got a range of 80, 30, and 320. You have to use two hands, and it's got Vex. So to really take advantage of the Vex on this weapon, you really need to be able to have more than one attack because you're not going to be doing offhand attacks with this one. All right, the next weapon that we're going to be looking at is the rapier. I'm not a real big fan of the rapier in 2024 or D&D 5th edition. It's doing the right kind of damage, 1d8 piercing, but it's only finesse. It's not a light weapon. So we could have it in our offhand, and we could do an attack if we had certain feats, but there's a feat tree that you have to go through to be able to do that. It does have Vex, which means we need to be able to do an extra attack to be able to take advantage of that in the most efficient way possible. All right, the next weapon we're going to talk about is the short sword, and this is the big one. This is the one that I really like for Vex. I also really like this one when Vex is layered in with Nick. So we have the short sword. It does a d6 piercing. It is finesse and light, which means if I have a short sword in each hand, I can take advantage of offhand attacks and I can use my dex, and it does have Vex. Now, a scimitar or a scimitar would be good with a short sword. You'll see above it, the scimitar has Nick, which means, and it's finesse and light, which means that you could make a primary attack with the scimitar, and then you are allowed to make an offhand attack with a light weapon, which could be a short sword. Now, if you did it the other way around, you wouldn't be able to do that because, well, you could. The short sword is light, but it doesn't have Nick, so you would be using a bonus action, and that just isn't efficient enough. So Nick allows you to make that extra attack as part of your attack action instead of a bonus action. But putting them together and getting the right feats in really allows this to be used very efficiently. All right, the next weapon that we are going to talk about is the blowgun. It does piercing damage. It does 1 piercing damage. It is dependent on ammunition. It has a range of 25 and 100, and it is loading. So you do have to load it. You do have to take you can only fire 1 piece of ammunition from loading a weapon when you use an action, a bonus action, or a reaction to fire, regardless of the number of attacks you make. So you can't make 2 attacks, and this is one that you can't actually change that with. It does have Vex. So you make an attack, You do a point of damage. Hopefully you've got some poison on it, and then you have to wait a whole round. So it's not the most efficient one. The crossbow is the go-to for this one. There is a feat tree for this. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It does a d6 piercing damage. It is dependent on ammunition with a range of 30, 120, and it uses the bolt. It has the light property, which means we can have one of these in our offhand, or allows us to make an offhand attack. And it does have loading, but there is a way to get around this, and it does have Vex. And because it has the light property, which allows offhand, we can take advantage of Vex in the same turn, which is great. And that's the last one. So those are the weapons. I would say out of these weapons, the best one for ranged is the hand crossbow, and the best one for melee combat is the short sword. The short sword is not necessarily a primary weapon. It's more of a secondary weapon along with this. I would pair this up with the scimitar, especially when you're starting to get multiple attacks. But again, Vex is really dependent on multiple attacks. And so you don't have to wait an entire round before you really can take advantage of that weapon mastery. There are a number of feats that do go well with Vex. Either they complement it, they integrate with it very well, or they actually work hand in hand with it. And what I mean is that they make it better. So archery is one of those that is very good at complementing it, but only if you're doing a ranged build. So it is a fighter or fighting style, and you have to have access to fighting styles to get this. It gives you a +2 bonus to attack rolls with any ranged weapon. So again, remember I mentioned the hand crossbow, and that is really going to require some kind of ranger rogue or fighter rogue combo. The next feat that I think is really good to be used with Vex, but also with Nick, and we've talked about that before, is Crossbow Expert. And it's a feat. You need to have a Dex 13 level 4. It gives us a bump to our Dex score. And then we can ignore the loading property, but only specifically we can ignore the loading property of hand crossbows, heavy crossbows, and light crossbows. Again, we're looking at that hand crossbow. That hand crossbow has the light property, which means we can make offhand attacks with it. We can fire into melee, and then it has this dual wielding thing, so when you make the extra attack of the light property, you can add your ability modifier, which could be Dex, to the damage of the extra attack if that attack is with a crossbow that has the light property. So that would be that hand crossbow, and again, there's the hand crossbow with Vex. So we make an attack with our primary hand, we're allowed to make an attack with our offhand, which now is at advantage because we have triggered Vex. And if we're a rogue, we're going to be able to get our sneak attack. Dual wielder, not the best feat with this, but it is something that you could use. It gives us a bump to strength or dex, and it's when we take the attack action on our turn with a light weapon, we can make one extra attack as a bonus action later in the same turn with a different weapon, and that weapon cannot have the two-handed property. So something like the rapier. So you could have a dagger in one hand and a rapier in the other hand with the short sword, which does have the light property. Then we can proc that light property off, and we can do an offhand attack with, a rapier or something like that. It's not the most efficient in the world. It doesn't work. There's not a nick that is involved in that because the short sword does have Vex, but you could be making that bonus action attack with advantage with this one. Defensive Duelist is a feat. It isn't necessarily one that makes Vex better or has anything to do with Vex, but it does give us a bump to our dex if we're holding a finesse weapon, which a short sword is a finesse weapon, and another creature hits us with a melee attack. We can take our reaction and add our proficiency bonus to her armor class. And you could get that up to almost what shield does. So this is kind of that swashbuckler type who parries. This might be a good one to get if you want to be a little bit more defensive. So most of the weapons that have Vex are piercing weapons. Remember, I talked about the hand axe, not my favorite, slashing. But the other ones, like the short sword and the blowgun, the hand crossbow, the rapier, the short bow, the dart, those are all piercing weapons. And they go very well with piercer. So it's a feat. It increases our strength or dex by 1. Once per turn, when we hit a creature with an attack that deals piercing damage, we can re-roll 1 of the attack's damage dice, and we must use the new roll. So that's a little bit extra. If we crit the piercing damage to a creature, you can roll 1 additional die, determining the extra damage. So we're going to get a little bit of extra damage or some better damage every time we attack or every time we crit. So this is a good one that can go along with piercer. It's not the strongest of these weapon style or damage type style feats, but it is something that does complement all of these Vex weapons very well. I like the feat Skulker because it does, I believe, go well with the hand crossbow, which is one of our go-to Vex weapons. So it's a feat. You need to have a dex of 13, 4th level or greater. You get a bump to your dex only. You have blind sight within a range of 10 feet. That is just okay. For the type of characters that I would be using with this, I wouldn't really be thinking about any of that. You get Fog of War, so you exploit the distractions of the battle, gaining advantage on any dex stealth check you make as part of a hide action during combat, which works well with the second thing. If you make an attack roll while hidden and the roll misses, making the attack roll does not reveal your location. So you could be hiding. You're going to get advantage, and there are a number of magic items that can be gotten that will just basically make Fog of War not worth it anymore, like a Cloak of Elvenkind or things like that. But you are going to get advantage on that stealth check, and then if you happen to miss, they won't be able to find you. If you do hit, you're going to have to hide again, but again, if it's during combat, you're going to have advantage. And this goes really well with that hand crossbow if you can find someplace to hide. So the last feat that we're going to talk about is 2-weapon fighting. It is a fighting style feat, so you need to have access to the fighting style feat itself. And it says when you make an extra attack as a result of using a weapon that has the light property, so if you happen to have a scimitar in one hand or a dagger that has the nick property, then you get to add your ability modifier to the damage of the attack if you aren't already adding it to the damage. So you have a nick weapon in your primary hand, you make that attack, it's nick and light, so it procs off a second attack from your offhand, which could be that short sword. Then you would get an addition to the damage equal to your ability modifier, which could be dex. And then if you had more attacks, the next attack, because the short sword has Vex, would have advantage. So it's you know, we've gone through this build, and it's just this kind of cascading effect of different weapon masteries and weapon properties. So as far as races and species go, I like the elf, and one of the only reasons I like the elf for this is because you get access to a particular feat, and I didn't go over this one in the feats because this one is not easy to get. You do have to be an elf, and that feat is Elven Accuracy. So you have to be an elf or a half-elf to get this. You increase your dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by 1, so that you get 4 choices. And then whenever you have advantage on an attack roll, which Vex goes with very well, using dex, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, you can re-roll 1 of the dice. Basically, you're getting 3 dice instead of 2 dice to get that crit that you need. And it increases the ability to get a crit massively. So the elf itself, Elf on a Shelf, is great for this just because of that. And the other race/species that I like is the halfling. Obviously, for obvious reasons, You can move through the space of any creature that's larger than you. You get that lucky die, and you get natural stealth, which, again, stealth goes very well with Vex if you're able to hit with these weapons. So as far as classes go, the Barbarian can use it because the Barbarian does get access to weapon masteries, but the Barbarian is not super efficient at it. The Fighter is probably something you're going to have to go to just to get some multiple attack stuff, because Vex is very dependent on multiple attacks. So as a Fighter, you do get access to weapon masteries. You do get extra attack at 5th level. And combinations of Fighters with Rogues are very good with Vex and Nick masteries. And as far as, of course, the subclass goes, I always like the Battle Master because of the superiority dice and the combat maneuvers you can do that allow you to move things through the battlefield, move them around, knock them down, things like that. So the Fighter is definitely one of the go-tos to mix up with Vex. Again, Vex is not going to be the primary cornerstone of these particular builds. It'll probably be something like Nick or Slow, but it will be something that will be integral or part of that particular build. The Paladin is another class that could get access to Vex. Not super efficient for it. I wouldn't recommend it. Some of you might have builds for this, but I just don't see it as something that would be great. The Ranger is another one of these classes that does get access to this. I think the Ranger would be pretty good just because it does get access to Vex and it does get an extra attack at 5th level. And you do have access to things like Hunter's Mark. So I think that would be a pretty good one to go to. Not the best. I do like Fighter better than this one, but I mean, there are some advantages with Ranger. The Gloomstalker class did get nerfed pretty heftily in 2024, but the Winterwalker's not too bad from the Faerun Forgotten Realms books, and of course, I do like the Hunter. And of course, the Rogue, which gets access to particular weapon masteries, is an awesome class for this because Vex does go well with sneak attack. And here it is right here, weapon masteries. You get training with 2 kinds of weapons that you have proficiency in. And short swords are some of those. You get access to short swords, and you do get access to hand crossbows as well, because it's simple weapons and martial weapons that have the finesse or light property. So you get access to the 2 best weapons that are there. The only problem with the Rogue is they don't get an extra attack. So you are going to have to kind of sustain that or complement that with another class, like 5 levels in Fighter or 5 levels in Ranger. And that is 5 levels you're going to have to take with that, or you're going to have to figure something else out with like the Nick mastery in order to get more attacks. As far as the subclasses go for these, I do like the Scion of the Three quite a bit from the new Faerun books. Assassin is always pretty good, and Arcane Trickster is always pretty good. All right, well, that is the video that I have for everybody today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody later.